Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today I am at Nancy Lake. It wasn't my intention to actually be at Nancy Lake today. I went last night to a trail in the Chugach State Park. I actually went to climb what's called Little O'Malley. And Little O'Malley, as I was going up to the trail down Powerline Pass to the trail that actually goes up to Little O'Malley, I encountered a bear and decided, given the time of day it was and the fact that I was going to have to come back at dusk or even maybe at a little bit of dark, I decided that maybe I didn't want to encounter that bear again when the trail was a bit darker, and decided maybe discretion was the better part of valor. And I ended up trying to do some other things at the park there. I tried to do a shot on Powerline Pass, which is truly beautiful, but it is very frequented, and I just kept on running across people, and people, of course, shouting, hey bear," in the background, trying to stay away from that bear. And then I tried the parking lot, but there were just too many people there, and so I thought, oh, I don't know what's going to happen this week. But today, I actually got invited to go out to the cabin of one of the members of the church here on Nancy Lake. And so in the background, we're not actually looking at Nancy Lake right now. We're looking at a pond that's behind that property, one of the many ponds, many lakes that makes up the state of Alaska. In fact, this is the most interesting little walk that I've done to get out here that I think I've been on so far, because I actually had to walk through a bit of a marsh to get out here, and so just that peat is just covering the ground here, and so you step and it's squish, but it's pretty cool. And hopefully you can enjoy some of the sights of this place as well. And we're going to be having a look today at Psalm 76. Let's go ahead and read that now. In Judah, God is known. His name is great in Israel. His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shield, the sword, and the weapons of war. Glorious are you, more majestic than the mountains full of prey. The stout-hearted were stripped of their spoil. They sank into sleep. All the men of war were unable to use their hands. At your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both rider and horse lay stunned. But you are to be feared. Who can stand before you when once your anger is roused? From the heavens you uttered judgment. The earth feared and was still, when God arose to establish judgment, to save all the humble of the earth. Surely the wrath of man shall praise you. The remnant of wrath you will put on like a belt. Make your vows to the Lord your God and perform them. Let all around him bring gifts to him who is to be feared, who cuts off the spirit of princes, who is to be feared by the kings of the earth. A very powerful question to ask in examining this psalm is, what does anger get you? What does anger achieve? I know that anger is a part of being a human, and I know that there's nothing at all wrong with being angry. In fact, the Bible doesn't say to not be angry. It says to be angry and sin not in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26. And the reality is that anger is a very important emotion. Anger causes us to focus on things and causes us to keep on focusing on those things until there is some kind of resolution. And obviously the Christian is meant to take that anger and to find a positive resolution. But as we think about the right or wrong of anger, even Jesus was angry. The Bible says in Mark chapter 3 and verse 5 that he looked upon those who were abusing the temple with anger. And so anger is a natural part of human life, and it's not wrong in any way. But what does anger get you when you are angry at something that can't be changed? When you're angry at something that is beyond the scope of doing anything about? And the answer is, of course, nothing. It's interesting that I was tasked with this psalm for this week. I tasked myself, of course, with this psalm for this week. Given what happened to me yesterday when I tried to go out and shoot this psalm, or rather the series of events that kept me from getting out to the park at the time that I wanted to get out, and so on. Well, we had a flat tire. I had to take that tire to the tire shop, and found out that I was going to have to buy a whole new set of tires because those tires were really no good, and just thought I might get through the summer without having to replace them, but have to replace them. And so all that sequence of events was very frustrating, especially when I found out about that flat tire, and I just didn't really know what would be my next step. And I was frustrated, but for all the frustration and all the anger that I felt at that moment, there was nothing that could be achieved by it. And the same thing can be thought about when we think about this psalm, because instead of thinking about flat tires, this psalm, of course, is having us think about God and having us think about the fact that it's futile or it's useless to be angry with God. You see, God is pictured in this psalm as being unchangeable, as being unmovable. And yet when we think about him from that point of view, there's a lot of people who are angry at him, aren't there? And in fact, as you look at the words of this psalm, you're meant to reflect upon his unchanging and his ever-dwelling nature. In fact, he is said to dwell in verse 2 at Zion. His abode is there. His dwelling place is there. And in fact, from that dwelling place, from that abode, he defeats any sword, any weapon of war that comes against him. The text says in verse 3 that he breaks. And so there is nothing and no one that can remove him from his place. There is nothing that can change his nature. He's there, and you're just going to have to deal with it. Well, sometimes people, they get angry at God. But what does their anger get them? Well, because God dwells, because he stays the same. The text goes on to say in verse 5 that in verse 6 that the enemies, they fall. The stout-hearted, they're stripped of their spoil. All the men of war are unable to use their hands. At your rebuke, God, the psalmist says, all of these people are stunned. They just have no response. There's nothing at all that they can do. In verse 7, no one can stand against God. You who are to be feared, the psalmist addresses him and says, who can stand before you once your anger is aroused? To get angry at God is to place yourself under the anger of God and, of course, to fail. This text goes on in verse 10 to picture God in a very interesting way. It pictures God as being he who wears anger. In the words of verse 10, it says, surely the wrath of man shall praise you, the remnant of wrath you will put on like a belt. And that's caused commentators a lot of heartache trying to figure out, well, why would God be wearing anger, and how can praise arise out of anger? But when I thought about this text, I immediately thought about Philippians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, where the Bible says that every knee, even those knees that once stood in anger, every knee is going to bow. Every tongue is going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And so you realize that anger is going to one day be overcome, and that God is going to reign victorious. And so what's the point of being angry? I love how this psalm, it pictures the futility of anger and that God is going to wear anger like a garment. But the psalmist's reaction to this is not one of really trying to avoid the circumstance or the situation. In verses 11 and 12, of course, he says logically, you need to make your vows to God, you need to honor him, you need to fear him. He is very powerful. But that isn't where this psalm is being written from. The psalmist is not writing this psalm from a place of fear or of forced respect. He's writing this psalm from a place of praise. He says that God's name is great in verse 1. He says that God is glorious in verse 4. And so why? Why would the psalmist be so in awe and so touched and desire to honor a God that is only pictured as standing against those who stand against him and remaining firm when they try to rise up against him? Well, because of what he does. His aim in remaining firm in his place is not merely to say, I told you so, or even worse, to do anything negative to humankind. In verses 8 and 9, from the heavens he utters judgment to save, it says in verse 9, the humble of the earth. And so judgment and salvation are what God has in mind. There's a twofold question and reflection from this psalm, and that is, one, what does anger get you when you're angry at God and his ways? Well, of course, absolutely nothing but frustration. But then two, why would you want to be angry at a God who only wants good for you, who wants justice for you, who wants salvation for you? It's amazing that people are angry at God, but we need to realize something about our God. God is not unduly angry at us. He's angry at sin. But he didn't come into this world to condemn us. What did he come in this world to do? It says in John 3:17, he came to save us. There's no sense in being angry at a God who is there simply to save. I hope that this psalm is a blessing to you, and I hope that when you face those challenging, angry moments, that you realize that there are some things that can be done through anger, but there are some times when we're angry and there's nothing at all that can be done. And then, of course, we don't want to be angry at God. He is he who is to be feared and respected, but he is also he who is to be worshiped and admired, because he is awesome. May God bless you today.